Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Central here. As you can see, the Mustang 2 has been transported, which frankly was one of the more stressful parts of the purchase. But with that out of the way, it is time to begin the project. And I think the best thing to do is to take inventory, starting with the instruments. What instruments came with the aircraft are relatively rudimentary. However, some of these will be used and some will be sold. One of the instruments that I intend on keeping is this, the ICOM IC-A200. As far as comm radios go, it's not top of the line, but it does have some nice features, and I do trust the ICOM name, so this is an instrument that I will be utilizing for the build. Another item that I was initially going to use in the build was this, the AT150, which is a transponder. This Narco is a pretty old, pretty reliable design. However, I don't think it's going to work with the system that I intend to put in. Or at least that is to say, there is a better option for my transponder. So this one is probably going to be sold. It'll be sold along with the encoding altimeter that it came with. What you're looking at here is a custom switch and breaker panel. The instrument panel is already cut for this, so I will be utilizing this in the build for simplicity's sake. If I had my druthers, I would have toggles rather than these rocker switches. However, these rocker switches feel pretty positive when they're switched over, so they will probably suffice. In terms of pitot-static gauges, we'll start off by looking at this vertical speed indicator. I haven't decided whether I'll be using this or not, however, it's very unlikely that I will. What I'll probably be utilizing will be some type of altimeter, however, I don't know if I'll be using the altimeter that was provided with the airplane. I called in the local AWOS and changed the Colesman window to match the current barometric pressure, and the altimeter is reading about 500 feet high, so this instrument will have to either be repaired or replaced with a different altimeter. There was also an airspeed indicator provided with the aircraft, and I probably will be utilizing this instrument, although I may make some modifications to it. This particular instrument I found to be fairly interesting. It's an AI that's electrically driven, so it would have worked in the panel, but I'm kind of limited on space, so I probably won't actually use this instrument. What I found kind of peculiar and interesting, though, is that it has a feature to cage the instrument. I suppose if you were doing aerobatics, you would be able to level the wings, pull that, and stop the AI from spinning. Quite often when aerobatics are performed and you're using some sort of mechanical steam gauge style AI, the gyros will tumble and it will not read accurately, so having that cage feature could be useful for that. There are a couple of more things that the instrument panel is already cut for, namely the master and the ignition switches. No instrument panel is complete, of course, without a compass. And there's also a clock that was provided, and this is a fairly interesting clock. It's an 8-day wind-up clock that is marked as being from a Beechcraft, so apparently this was taken from a Beechcraft. However, it was made by Wachman, and doing a little bit of research, what I found is that these clocks are fairly old, and they basically have a Breitling timepiece inside. Wachman had a special deal with the Swiss watchmaker to actually import their actions and build these for aircraft. Relatively inexpensive when compared to a actual Breitling, but in essence, a off-brand Breitling clock. So I will be adding this to the panel simply because of the cool factor. There were some other odds and ends that I have no intention of using, such as these engine gauges. I am planning to turn this O320 that the airplane came with into a fuel-injected EFI system. At least that's the plan right now, so these instruments won't be necessary. What you're looking at here is the panel layout that the previous owner was going to go with. This is just basically a rough sketch of what the instrument panel was going to have on it. As you can see, it was fairly Spartan. I did decide to go through and update this a bit. So for reference, this is actually part of the instrument panel here. I did have to go through and enlarge the instrument hole from 2 3/4 to 3 1/8 down in the lower left-hand corner, where the turn coordinator is positioned right now. I had to do that just to utilize the instruments that I had. I don't know why the hole was initially cut for 2 3/4. There were no instruments that actually would fit that slot, so I'm not quite sure what was going on there. As you can see, there is a large cutout in the center of the panel. That is large enough to fit a 7-inch Dynon screen, and I'm going to probably go with a 2-screen setup for the instrument panel. After putting this into my paint editor, this is what I came up with. So again, that'll be a 2-screen setup on the Dynon system. I have to make some measurements to see if I have room for the instrument trays behind the screens. If I do, that will be brilliant. That'll make things a whole lot simpler. If not, I'm going to have to figure out where to put all of the accessories that go with the system. But as you can see, I do have some switches on there for an autopilot, so I do intend to incorporate an autopilot into the panel. I'm not going to go with the Dynon audio panel. I want this Dynon screens to be a little bit less busy, and since I am looking at going with an aftermarket EFI system, and since that EFI system comes with its own instrument, probably not going to have any engine instrumentation being displayed through the Dynons either. However, you can see that I do have that secondary screen on there for the engine information. And you can also see the audio panel that I have added there. That's a PS Engineering PAR 200A. So what's neat about that instrument, or that audio panel, is that it actually does also incorporate a radio. So the radio is remote, it plugs into the audio panel, and that way I have 2 radios, which is, in my opinion, a must. I've never flown an aircraft with less than 2 radios. Well, actually, I take that back. I have flown in a Citabria when I was getting my tailwheel endorsement that only had one. But as far as everything else I've flown, I've always had more than 1 radio. And if you're going to be turning this into an IFR cross-country machine, there's really no point in not having 2. Bear in mind that this is not the final form for this panel. I'm sure that I'll be making some other changes before I finalize what I'm going to do. It is going to cost a pretty penny to get all of the avionics that I want into the panel and get everything set up. So if you are interested in supporting this project, starting next month, I'm going to be opening up my Patreon to new members, and there are 2 tiers. I'll have a video linked in the pinned comment below so you can see what those tiers are and what the perks are that are associated with each. Anyway, thanks for watching. I will catch you guys later.